The day we buried my father was the day I met his other children. Their names were in the will. Ours were just after. That was 18 months ago. And now I'm the executor of my father's estate. Holding the keys, literally and legally, to everything they thought they'd inherit. And suddenly, no one's laughing. Back then I was just Olivia Carter. Eldest daughter. The dependable one. The one who smoothed out chaos, swallowed tension, and kept the family image polished like the good silver. I was a clinical social worker in Chicago, quietly managing trauma for others while ignoring my own. My patients knew how to name their pain. I didn't. I just labeled mine as obligations and called it strength. I didn't plan to start therapy. Not really. It happened after a panic attack gripped me during a team meeting. Heart racing. Vision tunneling. I excused myself with a smile and sobbed in the bathroom like I was drowning. That night I made the appointment. The next day I lied to my mother and said I had food poisoning. My mother is Elaine Carter. Elegant, church-rooted, and practiced in the art of silence. She believes in image more than emotion. When my father, Thomas Carter, was alive, they were the picture of stability. A successful real estate developer and his gracious wife. But even pictures crack. And some fractures run beneath the frame, invisible until the canvas splits wide open. My siblings didn't take the news any better. Rachel, the middle child, fiery and blunt, rolled her eyes. You think some therapist is gonna fix 20 years of dad being distant and mom pretending it's fine? And Ethan, our youngest, just said nothing. He never does. He disappeared into his headphones, nodding like he agreed with both sides but belonged to neither. He's the softest of us. A musician who dropped out of college when the money dried up. No one talks about it. Especially not Dad's promise to take care of everything. Dad's promises always came with ellipses, not periods. He died suddenly, a heart attack on the golf course. 66 years old. No warning. No final words. Just gone. At the funeral the church was packed. Men in suits he mentored. Women who remembered his charity work. Reporters who called him a local icon. But in the front row we sat hollow. Elaine clutched her pearls like they were rosary beads. Rachel scrolled through funeral selfies on her phone. Ethan stared at the stained glass, lost in color. I just held it all together like always. And then came the reading of the will. That's when the cracks didn't just show, they exploded. Because Thomas "Tom" Carter left 60% of his assets, including the Michigan vacation home, most of his company shares and 2 fully funded trust accounts, not to us, but to a woman named Julia Mitchell. And her 2 children, Ava and Miles. Second family. Separate life. A betrayal that split us open. Rachel was the first to speak, spitting words like venom. Are you kidding me? Who the hell is Julia Mitchell? Ethan looked like someone had unplugged his soul. Mom, she just sat there frozen. Not shocked. Not angry. Just quiet. Like her body knew something her mind had buried. Me. I dissociated. The lawyer's words became echoes. I could feel the room tilt. I heard myself breathing shallow too fast. Somewhere deep inside I knew. This is what betrayal without closure feels like. It's not cinematic. It's cold. Clinical. Like being erased in real time. Then came the envelope. Handed directly to me. To Olivia, it read. Executor. I didn't ask for that role. But apparently I was the one he trusted to handle his unfinished life. Inside was a key to a storage unit in Ohio, and a sealed letter. That was the first day I stopped pretending to be okay. That was the first day I realized therapy hadn't made me weak. It had made me ready. Because now I wasn't just grieving my father. I was about to uncover the version of him none of us were ever meant to see. And what I found in that storage unit would change everything. The funeral had barely ended when the real unraveling began. Olivia sat in the oak-paneled conference room of Cartwright and Blake, her father's longtime law firm in downtown Chicago. Her black dress still clung to the grief of yesterday's burial, but her heart was already preparing for war. The air inside the room felt thinner than it should have. Too many unspoken suspicions, too many people pretending to mourn the same man. Elaine sat to Olivia's left, silent and rigid, her eyes fixed on the polished table. Rachel tapped her nails impatiently. And Ethan? He kept his head down, headphones wrapped around his wrists like a shield. Then came the lawyer's words. Thomas Carter's estate will be divided as follows. Olivia's breath caught mid-sentence. It wasn't just the numbers. It was the names. Julia Mitchell. Ava Mitchell. Miles Mitchell. Names that had never once been whispered in the Carter home were now inked into legal documents with authority. A woman in Ohio. Her 2 children. 60% of everything. It wasn't a blow. It was a dissection. Rachel shot up from her chair. This is a mistake. That woman, whoever she is, she doesn't belong here. The lawyer calmly adjusted his glasses. Mr. Carter revised his will 18 months ago. Everything is legally sound. Elaine didn't say a word. Just clutched her handbag tighter. Olivia noticed her mother's knuckles go white. A letter. A key. That's all Olivia got directly from her father, aside from her 13% share. A sealed envelope with her name in his familiar script. And a small silver key attached to a tag that read, Storage Unit Number 47, Akron, Ohio. It was the letter she couldn't bring herself to open. Not yet. Outside the law office, the sidewalk pulsed with city life, car horns, footsteps, summer heat rising off the concrete. But Olivia stood frozen. That was the moment she realized. Her father's death didn't close a chapter. It opened a locked door she never knew existed. And behind it was a man she didn't recognize. Olivia waited 2 weeks before driving to Ohio. She told no one, especially not Rachel, who had already started gathering lawyers for a possible challenge to the will. Ethan had withdrawn completely, spending most days in his apartment mixing ambient tracks no one ever heard. Elaine floated through the house like a shadow, refusing to speak about the other woman. Olivia, meanwhile, felt herself splitting. There was the daughter who had loved Tom Carter, the man who taught her to tie a Windsor knot, who called her his quiet compass. And then there was the woman who had sat in that boardroom and learned her father had built another life. Funded it. Protected it. Hidden it. The drive to Akron was quiet. Just her and the hum of the road, her phone on silent, the letter still unopened in her glove compartment. The storage facility stood just outside town, beige, bland, and forgettable. Unit number 47 was at the end of the row. She stared at the lock for a long time before inserting the key. Inside was no mystery, no scandalous photos, no love letters. Just boxes. Neatly labeled. Tax returns. Real estate paperwork. A few old suits and garment bags. And one fireproof safe with her initials engraved in the corner. Inside the safe were 2 things, a manila folder and a second letter. The folder was financial. Cold, clean, factual. It detailed wire transfers to a bank account in Ava Mitchell's name. A trust fund. It was substantial. Far more than what her younger brother Ethan ever received. College money, business seed funding, all locked and ready. She sat on the concrete floor and finally opened the second letter. Liv, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And you know by now that I wasn't the man you believed me to be. I won't ask for forgiveness. I only ask you to remember I never stopped loving you. I made choices to protect everyone. You most of all. He signed it like he always did, Dad, in cursive that looked just slightly rushed. Tears didn't come right away. What came was nausea. Then rage. Then the cold acceptance that everything she thought about her father's love was conditional. She closed the storage unit, returned to her car, and looked at herself in the rearview mirror. She didn't look broken. She looked like a woman finally waking up from a long, careful lie. And from that moment on, Olivia decided she wouldn't be a silent compass anymore. Olivia returned to Chicago different. Not colder but sharper, like glass that had been tempered by flame. She walked into her mother's home like a woman who had seen behind the curtain. Elaine noticed it immediately. Over tea she asked no questions, offered no sympathy. Just silence and trembling fingers on porcelain. Olivia didn't push. Not yet. It was Rachel who broke the quiet. I want to contest the will, she announced, seated at the head of the family dining table, the one their father always used during holidays. The table was heavy, mahogany, and scarred from decades of use. It had seen laughter, politics, and punishment. But today it became a war table. On what grounds? Olivia asked, voice calm. He lied to us, Liv. Financial infidelity counts. And that woman, Julia, she manipulated him. You know that, right? Across the table, Ethan flinched. He hadn't spoken much since the reading. Now he barely lifted his eyes. We don't even know her, he murmured. Rachel snapped. Exactly. We don't know her. And yet she has more of our father's estate than we do. That should tell you something. Olivia didn't argue. She simply placed the folder from the Ohio storage unit on the table. Fully. Deliberately. What's that? Rachel asked. Proof, Olivia said. Of what he gave them. How long it's been going on. Trusts. Payments. Plans. Elaine finally looked up. Her face was pale, drawn tight with grief and something older, humiliation maybe. How long? Over a decade, Olivia answered, barely above a whisper. Rachel lunged for the folder. She flipped through it, growing angrier with each page. He gave her kids a trust. He let Ethan struggle and gave her children a damn trust fund. The room cracked open. Ethan stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "I didn't ask for anything," he shouted, voice hoarse. "I never wanted his money. I just wanted him to see me." That silenced everyone. Elaine's lips quivered, but she didn't speak. Rachel looked gutted. And Olivia, she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at her brother with something soft and exhausted in her eyes. "I'm not contesting anything," Olivia said. "Not because I think it's fair, but because I'm done begging for pieces of love that should have been given freely." She stood, collected the folder, and walked away from the table that had for so many years defined their family. From that moment on, she knew healing wouldn't come from winning a courtroom. It would come from breaking the cycle and walking away intact. Back in her apartment, Olivia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the sealed envelope her father had left her. The key to the Ohio storage unit had led to old deeds, financial records, and a second set of car keys. But this letter felt heavier than everything else combined. It was thick, written on the same cream stationery he used for business, and sealed with wax. Her name was written on the front in his precise, architectural handwriting, Olivia Grace Carter. She hesitated, not out of fear but weariness. After everything she had uncovered, the betrayal, the lies, the quiet favoritism, what could he possibly say that would make sense of it all? Still, she opened it. The first line stopped her breath. "If you're reading this, I've already failed you in ways I may never fully understand." He spoke in the voice she remembered, measured, intelligent, emotionally distant but painfully honest. He didn't apologize for loving another woman. He didn't try to justify his actions. Instead, he confessed to being a man split in two, the public figure who upheld morality, and the private man too afraid to confront his own emotional cowardice. "You were always the strongest, Olivia. That's why I leaned on you more than I should have. You carried burdens I never asked your siblings to carry. I told myself it was because you could handle them. I never asked if you wanted to." The words hit her like truth always does, hard then healing. He explained that Julia had been a part of his life during the years when his marriage to Elaine had become more of a business partnership than a love story. He wrote of guilt, of trying to do right by two families without fully honoring either. "The storage unit holds the financial truth. But this letter is the only emotional inheritance I have left to offer you." He ended with a request, strangely simple: "Live differently than I did. Love with your whole chest. And never let silence become your way of surviving." When she finished reading, Olivia sat still for a long time. No tears. Just clarity. The kind that doesn't come from forgiveness, but from seeing a person, flaws and all, without the lens of hero worship. She placed the letter into her leather-bound therapy journal, right between the pages where she had written letters to her younger self. Letters full of apologies and promises she was still learning to keep. Later that night, she pulled out a small metal box from her closet. A lockbox filled with affirmations, therapy notes, and grounding tools. She added the letter to it not as a keepsake but as a marker. The day she stopped defining herself by what her father failed to give, and started choosing what she would no longer pass down. It was the first time in weeks she slept through the night. Not peacefully but purposefully. And that, she thought, was enough for now. The house in Mississippi looked smaller than Olivia remembered. More like a shell than a home. But the memories still lived inside it, clinging to the walls like humidity. She hadn't planned on returning so soon after the will was read, but Rachel had insisted, "We need to talk. All of us. Face to face." Olivia drove down alone. Ethan flew in from New York. Elaine, their mother, hadn't left. She stayed there after the funeral, quiet and composed, as if standing still might prevent everything from collapsing. They gathered around the dining room table, a place once reserved for Christmas dinners and Sunday night roasts. Now it was a battleground. Rachel sat across from Olivia, arms folded, jaw clenched. Ethan lingered near the kitchen doorway, his posture screaming discomfort. Elaine broke the silence first. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I suspected, but I didn't know about the other family. Not like this." Her voice cracked, not from rage but something heavier. Humiliation. Olivia had never seen her mother look so undone. Rachel, on the other hand, looked like she'd been preparing for war. "I want to challenge the will," Rachel said bluntly. "Julia doesn't deserve 60% of everything." She broke up this family. No, Dad broke up this family, Olivia replied, her tone calm but firm. Julia didn't write that will. He did. Rachel scoffed. And you're just going to let it go? After everything? After Ethan had to drop out of school because Dad didn't help? While her kids got trust funds. Ethan finally spoke, voice soft but clear. I don't want to fight over money. That's easy for you to say, Rachel snapped. You didn't idolize him like she did. Olivia felt the sting in her sister's words. She had idealized their father. She had built her identity around being the daughter he leaned on, the one who kept the family stitched together. And now she was unraveling all of it, publicly. I'm not defending what he did, Olivia said. But tearing each other apart over his choices won't fix what he broke. We're allowed to be angry. But we don't have to become him. Elaine looked down at her hands, elegant, still wearing the thin gold wedding band he'd given her decades ago. Your father was a complicated man, she murmured. He built everything but never taught any of us how to hold it. Silence fell again, heavier this time. Olivia took a deep breath and opened her therapy journal. She had brought it as armor, but now it felt like a bridge. She read a passage aloud, something she'd written weeks ago. Peace is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of choice. Rachel didn't respond, but her shoulders dropped. Ethan leaned in slightly. Elaine just closed her eyes. They didn't come to a resolution that day. No legal decisions were made. No hugs exchanged. But for the first time, everything was out in the open. The betrayal, the grief, the ache of growing up under someone else's silence. And that, Olivia thought as she packed her bag to return to Chicago, was a start. Not of healing but of honesty. Sometimes the wound has to breathe before it can close. The house was quiet, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the uneasy calm of grief. It was the tension of splintering truths held together by fragile denial. Olivia sat at the edge of the dining table, her journal unopened beside her. Across from her, Rachel flipped through paperwork with the kind of urgency that masked pain with practicality. Their mother, Elaine, stood by the window, arms crossed, looking out like she might spot answers in the garden her husband once tended. The air felt different now. The reading of the will had cracked something in all of them. Olivia was still processing what it meant to have received so little, not just financially but symbolically. Rachel had taken it as confirmation of betrayal, her anger sharp and unfiltered. He left everything to a woman we never met, she'd snapped earlier. And you're still trying to find meaning in a damn letter. Olivia didn't respond. Not then. She was beginning to understand that silence had always been the family's chosen language, especially when emotions got too loud. But inside her mind was spinning. Julia Mitchell. 2 children. A separate life funded while her own brother had dropped out of college for lack of support. Ethan hadn't said much since the will was read. He mostly stayed in his room, headphones on, guitar in hand. When Olivia checked in, he only shrugged. What's the point? He asked, not with bitterness but with resignation. He was a different man to all of us. I'm done trying to figure out which version was real. The only person who hadn't spoken at all was Elaine. But Olivia knew that silence well. It was the kind that hid fury behind poise. When Elaine finally spoke, it was with surgical precision. We won't contest it, she said. We will not air this family's shame in court. Rachel exploded. Shame? He made this mess. We didn't ask for any of it. But sure, let's protect his legacy. Let's stay classy like always. Olivia wanted to defend their mother, but a part of her agreed with Rachel. He felt like a rope pulled in 2 directions, loyalty and truth. That night, after Rachel stormed out and Elaine retreated to her bedroom, Olivia finally opened the letter again. Her father's words still stung, even cloaked in apology. I failed you in ways I couldn't admit until it was too late. But the letter wasn't what haunted her. It was the key. The one to the storage unit in Ohio. She hadn't told anyone about it yet, not even Ethan. She wasn't sure if it was cowardice or self-preservation, but something in her said she needed to see what was in there, alone. The next morning she packed a bag without explanation. Elaine watched from the hallway, arms folded. Going somewhere? Olivia nodded. I just need some space. Elaine didn't press. Instead she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A kind of unspoken permission. Or maybe surrender. As Olivia pulled out of the driveway, A storm was rolling in over the horizon. It felt appropriate. Nothing was calm anymore. Not the skies, not the family, not her heart. But for the first time she wasn't afraid of what the storm might wash away. She was ready for what it might reveal. Olivia stared at the small rusted key in her palm. It had been sitting in the bottom of her father's sealed envelope for weeks, untouched. She wasn't ready to know what it opened until now. The drive to suburban Ohio was quiet, her hands steady on the wheel but her chest tight. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find in the storage unit. Closure? Clarity? Maybe just proof that her grief had a shape. The unit was small and cold, the kind of place where secrets collected dust. Inside time was frozen. Cardboard boxes stacked unevenly. A military duffel. A metal filing cabinet. And a single shoebox marked only with her name. She reached for it, heart pounding. Inside, old photographs, her ballet recital, a family barbecue, snapshots of her laughing, unaware someone had even taken the picture. And beneath them a voice recorder and a letter. The envelope read, "To the child I failed." She couldn't open it. Not yet. Instead she walked backward into the dim unit and sat on the concrete floor. The air smelled of dust and pine cleaner. Her knees pulled to her chest. It was the first time she let herself feel the weight of every withheld truth. The silence between father and daughter. The memories he curated and the ones he buried. Later, back in her apartment, Olivia lit a candle and opened the letter. Her father's handwriting was uneven, shaky, unsure. The words weren't defensive. They weren't excuses. They were a man's attempt at honesty, too late to fix what he'd broken, but desperate to at least name it. He wrote about fear. About how loving her felt like holding a mirror to the parts of himself he hated. About how he couldn't give her what she needed, not because she was unworthy, but because he was incapable. The recorder sat on her nightstand for days. And then one night, after a difficult therapy session, she hit play. His voice filled the room. Older, slower. The kind of voice that knew it didn't have much time left. He talked about regret. About watching her grow from a distance even while sitting across the dinner table. About moments he remembered that she thought he'd forgotten. And then he said it, "I didn't know how to be your father. But I always wanted to be." She didn't cry right away. At first it was just quiet. A kind of stillness that felt like standing in the middle of an abandoned church. Then came the tears, not of loss but release. Not out of longing but relief. She had spent so long chasing his approval, trying to be worthy of a love he hadn't known how to give. Now she didn't need it anymore. She picked up her journal, opened to a blank page and wrote, "I didn't lose a father. I lost the version of him I wanted to be real." And for the first time in a long time, Olivia slept without the weight of unfinished conversations pressing on her chest. The dining room had once been a place of quiet rituals. Sunday dinners, birthday candles, her mother's cold but reliable casserole lineup. Now it felt like a courtroom, each seat occupied not by family, but by witnesses to a betrayal no one wanted to name out loud. Olivia sat at one end of the table, posture calm but bracing for impact. Across from her, Rachel looked like a fuse already lit. Arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes full of accusation. Ethan sat beside the window, headphones pulled down around his neck, gaze fixed on a spot just above the wallpaper border, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Elaine Carter, their mother, stood at the head of the table, holding the revised will like it might shatter in her hands. Her voice was quieter than usual, measured as if each word was being weighed for shame. "Your father left instructions," she began. "This is what he wanted." Rachel scoffed. "Don't give me that. You knew. Maybe not everything, but you knew he was hiding something. You just didn't want to deal with it." Elaine flinched like she'd been slapped. But Olivia didn't move. She didn't try to intervene. Not this time. For years she'd been the peacekeeper, the translator between fury and silence. But she was done mediating other people's wounds while ignoring her own. Rachel turned on her. "And you, sitting there like you're so damn composed. You knew about Julia and the kids before we did. Why didn't you tell us?" "I found out the same way you did," Olivia said, voice even. "At the reading. But I've been trying to understand it. Not just react to it." Rachel's laugh was dry. "Therapy language. Figures. That language," Olivia said gently, "is the only reason I'm not ripping this family apart the way you want to." That landed like a body blow. Rachel looked away, blinking too fast. The silence stretched. Ethan finally spoke. He left me nothing. Nothing that mattered anyway. His voice cracked on the last word. College funds for kids he barely raised, but not for me? I dropped out and I thought it was my fault. I thought I just wasn't trying hard enough. Olivia turned to him, her heart aching. It wasn't your fault, Ethan. You were surviving a house that fed you expectations and called them love. Elaine's composure crumbled then. She sat down slowly, her lips trembling. I gave him everything, she whispered. I gave up everything to hold this family together. And still I wasn't enough. For the first time, Olivia didn't rush to comfort her. Not because she didn't care, but because she was finally learning to let people sit with the consequences of what they allowed. She wasn't here to carry her mother's grief or her siblings' anger, or the legacy of a man who wore two faces like tailored suits. She stood up. I'm not here to fight over scraps. I came to say I'm not hiding anymore. Not from the truth, not from any of you. Rachel's eyes narrowed. So what, you're just walking away? No, Olivia said. I'm finally walking toward something. Peace. Boundaries. My own life. She slid her chair back in, slow and intentional. The same way you'd push in your chair after the last family dinner you'll ever attend. And then she left. Not out of anger, but with clarity. Because sometimes survival isn't about staying. It's about having the strength to walk out of the room you once begged to be let into. The house in Mississippi hadn't changed much. Same peeling porch paint. Same wind chimes that tinkled like half-forgotten lullabies. Olivia stood on the steps longer than she should have, keys in one hand, her therapy journal in the other. She wasn't here to fight anymore. Not to argue over the land or the will or their father's reputation. She was here to close a door, literally and emotionally. Inside, the air felt heavier than she remembered. Dust-covered family portraits still clung to the walls, as if time had paused in grief. Elaine sat at the dining room table, her posture elegant but tired. Rachel stood by the fireplace, arms crossed, tension pouring from every limb. Ethan leaned against the kitchen doorframe, earphones in, gaze distant. No one spoke at first. Olivia took the seat at the head of the table, their father's old chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. She didn't need to raise her voice. She laid out copies of the revised estate documents, her notes, and the letter she'd received from the storage unit. Everything was in order. No secrets left to weaponize. I'm not here to take anything from you, she said softly. I'm here to protect what's left of us. Rachel scoffed. There's nothing left, Liv. Dad made sure of that. Olivia didn't flinch. Maybe. But I won't let his mistakes dictate who we become. Elaine finally spoke. You sound just like him. No, Olivia replied, her voice unwavering. I finally sound like me. The final conversation wasn't dramatic. No screaming, no tears. Just long silences, reluctant nods, and the quiet unraveling of years of unspoken grief. Olivia handed each of them a copy of the letter, not to absolve their father, but to release themselves from carrying what wasn't theirs to hold. Later, alone in the front yard, Olivia pulled out her journal. She flipped past pages of anger, sorrow, and confusion, and wrote a single sentence beneath her father's last words. This house may have raised me, but it doesn't own me. She walked back to the door, locked it behind her, and dropped the keys through the mail slot. The final click echoed like punctuation. She didn't look back. Back in Chicago, Olivia stepped into her apartment and let the silence embrace her like a warm blanket. No more unread letters. No more secret keys. No more rooms haunted by echoes of someone else's choices. Just her, standing whole for the first time in years. She placed the therapy journal on her coffee table, next to a lit candle. It wasn't just a book anymore. It was a record of survival. Pages filled with truths she once feared would shatter her. But they hadn't. They had rebuilt her. Work resumed. Life resumed. But Olivia had changed. She started taking her lunch breaks in the sun instead of behind her desk. She laughed more easily, not out of politeness, but because joy no longer felt like betrayal. And in therapy she no longer spoke only of pain, but of boundaries, of peace, of possibilities. A few weeks later she got a letter from Julia Mitchell, her father's second partner. Handwritten. Respectful. No demands, no manipulation. Just an acknowledgement. A thank you for not turning the estate battle into a war zone. Julia mentioned that her children, Tom's other kids, had also read the letter he left for Olivia. They'd asked questions. Hard ones. And maybe someday they'd want to meet. Olivia didn't know how to feel. But for the first time she didn't try to decide right away. She allowed herself the space to say, maybe. When I'm ready. That too was healing. One Sunday she visited her father's old office building, the one now partially owned by a new board, with Olivia listed as a minority shareholder. She stood in the lobby for a moment. No bitterness. Just quiet power. She didn't need to be in charge to feel in control. That part of her identity no longer depended on proving herself. As she walked past the glass doors, her reflection caught her eye. Not the responsible daughter. Not the invisible fixer. Just Olivia, whole, healing here. That night, before bed, she added one final page to her journal. No tear-streaked monologues. No poetic metaphors. Just this. I am not what they did to me. I am what I chose to become after. And with that she closed the book. Not because the story was over, but because this chapter finally was. The summer air in Mississippi was thick, almost ceremonial, like it knew something was ending. Olivia stood alone outside the family house. The one where expectations were louder than love, where silence was used as currency, and guilt was passed down like heirloom china. She'd come to say goodbye, but not with fanfare. No final family meeting. No confrontations. Just closure her way. The house was already half emptied. Elaine had moved in with Rachel temporarily. Ethan was back in Chicago, distant but steady. Olivia had come down to handle the last logistics. A few legal signatures, a final inspection, and one symbolic act she hadn't told anyone about. She walked room to room with quiet reverence. Not nostalgia. That would imply warmth. Just acknowledgement. The dining room where she'd swallowed her voice. The hallway where she'd once waited, ear pressed to her parents' door, hoping to feel needed. Her father's office, now cleared of papers but not of betrayal. And her childhood bedroom, still painted soft lavender, where she first wrote affirmations in a spiral notebook to survive the chaos downstairs. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't sad, but because this grief had aged. Matured. It no longer begged for recognition. Simply was. Downstairs she gathered the last few items into a box. The worn leather-bound therapy journal, a framed photo of her and Ethan as kids, and a small jewelry box she hadn't noticed before. Inside it her mother's old locket, tarnished but intact. Olivia slipped it into her bag. Not to keep the past, but to remind herself she had lived through it. Then she reached for the front door key. The one her father once carried like a symbol of pride and control. She ran her fingers over the edges one last time, then turned toward the door. Outside, cicadas hummed their approval. The street was still. The sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the porch. She stood for a moment, staring at the place that had both raised and caged her. Then, without drama, without hesitation, she leaned forward and dropped the keys through the mail slot. A quiet clink echoed from inside. Final. Unmistakable. Olivia stepped back, exhaled deeply, and whispered, "This house may have raised me, but it doesn't own me." She turned, walking toward her car. Each step felt lighter, more hers. Not because she'd won something, but because she'd finally stopped trying to win what should have been freely given. And as the driveway disappeared in her rearview mirror, she didn't look back. Sometimes the real inheritance isn't what's written in a will, it's what you reclaim for yourself. If this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. Peace is not selfish, it's earned.